Rod Ovid here with another Take 5, something we bring to you every Monday through Saturday on this Facebook page for Rod Ovid and for Logos Institute of Biblical Studies, a time that we spend together in the Word, encourage one another, and just keep us going between Sundays. Today I'd like to read just some of the narratives about Elijah. There's something about the writing here in 2 Kings when it comes to Elisha. Things slow down. It's almost like real time. A lot of details. I've always enjoyed reading about the ministry of Elijah. It's somewhat like the narratives of Jesus. You get to walk among the people. You get to see the dust swirling. And it's at a pace we just sort of follow along and watch. And that's the feeling I get when I start reading about Elisha. I'd like to pick it up in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 8. One day Elijah went to Shunem. Now Shunem was halfway between where the prophets lived, where Elijah lived, and the mount that he would go to worship. And so halfway through he would stop in this little village. And it says that a well-to-do woman was there who urged him to stay for a meal. So whenever he came by, he stopped there to eat. Now that's convenient, that's awesome, that's good. It breaks up the day, it gives him some nourishment. And she said to her husband one day, she says, "I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God." Then she suggests, let's make a small room on the roof and put in a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us. Now what I find interesting, even back to the first time I ever read this passage, I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God. Now, I don't think he necessarily wore a placard that said that. I don't think he had a halo. I don't think there was some neon sign overhead that pointed toward him and said, "Holy Man of God." But there was something about him, his behavior, his actions, his demeanor, that led her to believe with surety that this guy was a holy man of God. And I wonder what people think of us. People we meet at work, people we meet often at the grocery store, those we come across at the restaurants we frequent, our neighbors. Do you think in their private conversations they ever say, I think that lady, that man that comes here often, I think they're people of God, holy people of God. And it's an interesting thing to wonder about the perception people have of us. Is it just, boy, that is one shrewd businessman. Boy, that is just really a successful lady. Boy, they just have such a beautiful house. Boy, they sure dress to the nines, and they must have done well for themselves. Or perhaps it's even a little more negative. What a grouch. I don't like being around that person. Every time they come in, they give me the creeps. They're always so grouchy, always so negative. Sometimes we need to wonder what people perceive about us. And this lady, and I believe her husband as well, sensed that he was a holy man of God, and they wanted to do something to help. So they built this addition under the house so he could stay there. And actually his servant Gehazi stayed there with him. So after they had stayed there a while, Elijah came by, and he went up to his room and laid down and slept. And he said to his servant Gehazi, "Call the Shunammite." So he called her, and she stood before them. Elijah said to him, "Tell her, you have gone to all this trouble for us. Now, what can be done for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army?" She replied, "I have a home among my own people." So Elijah asked, "Well, what can be done for her?" And Gehazi says, "Well, she has no son, and her husband is old." Then Elijah said, "Call her." So he called her, and she stood in the doorway. "About this time next year," Elijah said, "you will hold a son in your arms." "No, my lord," she objected. "Don't mislead your servant, O man of God." Now that's an interesting situation there. He wants to do something for the woman's consideration, for her attentiveness to their needs. And she says, I'm fine. I have a home among my people. I don't need much. And the servant, Gehazi, had spoken to her, and he says, well, there is one thing. She has no child, and her husband is old. And so God's servant said to her, by this time next year, you'll hold a son. And her reaction is very interesting. Now, she's not doubting here. She's not refuting what he's saying. What we hear here is an earnest cry of joy mixed with apprehension. Don't tease me, more or less. I could think of nothing better, but I really don't know if it's possible. I haven't thought about it for a long time. You hope and you pray, and sometimes you get to the point where it's just too late. It's not going to happen. You're too old, or you'll never have enough to do that. And so you no longer hold out hope. And so here, God, speaking directly through the prophet, says, you will have a son. And she just says, don't mislead your servant, O man of God. It was a shame not to have a child in that day. In many cases, it was very inconvenient because your children were your legacy and your social security, your old age pension, more or less. The children took care of you as you got older. Now, because of the wealth she had, she was buffered from that, but I'm sure she felt some reproach and ridicule by not having a child, and I'm sure she wanted nothing more than a child. And all she could think of is, please, I want this so bad. Don't lead me on. Don't build up my hopes. And it's interesting because the next verse says, but the woman became pregnant. And the next year, about that same time, she gave birth to a son, just as Elijah had told her. Now we're going to pick this up again tomorrow, see what happens here. But I love the narrative. It's at a good pace. We get some insight. And we really need to be thinking to ourselves, what is the impression we leave with people? Can they look at us and earnestly say, that's a woman or man of God? And what are some of those things we've hoped for and we've sort of just let go of? Perhaps we need to pick those up again and pray to God, renew our faith. So think about these things, ponder them in your heart, review your standing before others, and ask God to use you. And I'll ask God to use me as a beacon, as a light to others, to draw others to God. You do that. Think on that. Be cognitive in your actions toward others, and you will certainly have a blessed day.